Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar. I am Chloe Tetro, and I'm the coaching lead here at Ready Care. For this morning, we're going to focus on polycystic ovarian syndrome again, and it's actually Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome Awareness Month in September. So for today, we're going to look at the specific diet that can reverse polycystic ovarian syndrome. We're going to look at what is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's a mouthful to begin with, but the ins and out of the diagnostic criteria. So how does one get diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome? Its role to insulin, and specific food groups and their impact on insulin. So basically, at the end of this talk, you will have a roadmap of foods to eat, foods to avoid, the thought process behind these, and why these combinations of foods can help to reverse polycystic ovarian syndrome. So to start off with, I suppose for those that are aware of polycystic ovarian syndrome, and for those that might want a bit more information on what exactly it is and why it's linked to diet, because the link with diet can be new information for an awful lot of women diagnosed with the condition. So polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I will refer to as PCOS for the rest of this chat, just to save my breath and your time. It's a complex hormonal disorder. It affects between 5% to 10% of women of reproductive age. It is the leading cause of infertility, but it has also significant metabolic implications. So PCOS is characterized by irregular periods, excess male hormones, which we call androgens, and the appearance of small cysts on the ovaries. Now, we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail in a second, but these symptoms don't stand by themselves. Many of them are driven by the deeper issue of insulin resistance. So if you think of insulin, which a lot of people would associate with diabetes, and that is implemented in insulin, but for the sake of today, just know that insulin has lots of different conditions that it can affect in the body. So if you think of insulin as the key that opens the door to your cells, and it allows them to absorb glucose or sugar from the bloodstream for energy. In those with PCOS, this key doesn't work really well, and cells become resistant to insulin. So the body has a tendency to compensate by producing more insulin, which causes this domino effect. So as the blood sugars raise, the body is producing more and more and more insulin to try and push that back into normal ranges. So high insulin levels will then trigger the ovaries to produce more androgens, which are male hormones like testosterone, leading to many of the symptoms associated with PCOS, such as weight gain, acne, difficulty ovulating. And what I'll say there as well is there's also the secondary type of symptoms associated. So for those individuals that are living with PCOS, there are the main diagnostic symptoms, which we'll touch on in a while. But there's also the confidence, the knock to confidence, the knock to self-image that can go with, excess growth of hair in places you don't want, thinning hair in places that you do want. There's the confidence and the lack of confidence that goes with struggling with weight for most of your life, and the psychological impacts that these things can have. So when I speak about these symptoms during this talk, and I speak about some of its impact, hold there as well the day-to-day experience that can go with having some of these symptoms that I'll mention today, because it's quite a complex condition that affects women in lots and lots of different ways. And to be honest with you, no two women will experience polycystic ovarian syndrome in the same ways. Now, all is not lost, thankfully, because a low carbohydrate diet will address that root cause. It will address the root cause of insulin resistance by lowering blood sugar levels, which reduces the body's demand for insulin. So less insulin means fewer androgens are produced, leading to a reduction in the symptoms. So there is no known cure as such, but managing insulin levels through diet is essentially replicating that mechanism backwards. So you're reverse engineering the condition to arrive back at a state of health. So the diagnostic criteria. How do people know that they have polycystic ovarian syndrome? Now, as I said, keep in mind, no two women experience polycystic ovarian syndrome in the exact same way. There are key diagnostic criteria, though, that from a medical perspective will warrant a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it's diagnosed using what's called the Rotterdam criteria, like the place name, which requires at least 2 out of 3 key symptoms. So irregular or absent ovulation, which will show itself in irregular periods or no periods whatsoever, high androgen levels, and polycystic ovaries, as the name would suggest. Now we'll go into that, why that's a bit of a misnomer in a little while. So let's break those down and see, how is insulin really the thing that's driving those symptoms? So the irregular or absent ovulation, or what's otherwise called anovulation. Normally, the body will produce a balance of hormones that signal the ovaries to release an egg every month. So that's during the menstrual cycle. With insulin resistance, the system can't really speak properly, for want of a better term. So it starts to break down a little bit. So high insulin levels throw off that balance. And to use an analogy, it'd be like trying to bake a cake but putting way too much sugar in. So you don't come out with the cake that you were hoping to get, basically. So the hormonal imbalance disrupts the process of ovulation. It's a very, very finely tuned balancing act. So when there's any upset, when there's any spanner thrown in the works, it very, very much upsets the cycle. So by lowering insulin levels through a low carb diet, you can restore back that really finely tuned balance, which will allow the body to ovulate more regularly. Now, elevated androgens are what's also called hyperandrogenism. So anytime you see hyper, it just means high, which you'd see if you saw little kids running around the place. If you call them hyper, they're very high. So excess androgens like testosterone, they're responsible for many of the outward signs and symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Things like acne. So acne around the face, chest, back are the most common places to have acne, but they're not the only places that people can get acne. What's called hirsutism, which is a term given for excessive hair growth in areas that are not typical for women to have them. Or they will get hair in those areas in more kind of male pattern. So things on the arm, quite dark hair in around the belly button, the chest area, and in and around the face. What you can also find there is hair thinning around the excuse me, crown of the head and into the hairline, and in and around the eyebrows as well. Pardon me, my voice is going. Excuse me. So high insulin levels tell the ovaries to actually produce more of these androgens. It's like turning up the heat in that oven. You end up overcooking. I'm going to stick to my cake analogy here, for better or worse. So when you reduce that insulin with the low carb diet, you lower your androgen production. So what you'll find is, if you're somebody that has struggled with acne and hair growth, and you've tried creams, you've tried things that only look at acne itself and not the root cause, the knock-on effect of the insulin being turned down basically means your skin has a chance to clear up, the hair growth can reduce down, and your hormone balance is much more balanced. And then these cysts. So the term cyst is actually a misnomer. So they're not true cysts. What they are, and I'll stick to my cake analogy, they're uncooked eggs, which is a much cruder version of my analogy. But what I mean by that is, the polycystic ovary terminology refers to the small underdeveloped follicles that accumulate on the ovaries. So the follicles are a byproduct of the hormonal imbalance caused by insulin resistance. So they're basically like the uncooked eggs. They're not finished cooking because the oven wasn't working properly to begin with. So in the usual cycle, these eggs will basically go to maturity and be released, which is what would happen during a period. Whereas in the hyper insulin stage, it basically cuts off that process prematurely, and what the ovaries will retain are underdeveloped follicles. So these cysts are not actually true cysts, they're actually just little follicles that are accumulated around the ovaries. So all three of these criteria are interconnected by insulin resistance. So again, when you lower insulin levels through dietary changes, particularly a low-carb diet, you directly address this root cause. So I've gone through the diagnostic criteria, so let's look at the role of insulin and how food choices can really, really, really impact this. And you're probably starting to get a bit of an idea if all of the main symptoms are caused by this high insulin. You can see that through food choices that drive back down that insulin, a lot of these symptoms are going to reverse and get better in time. So insulin is this driving force behind much of what happens in the body of a woman with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So if you think of it like a delivery truck, and glucose is the package it's trying to deliver to your cells. In women with insulin resistance, the truck can't find the right address. It's like one of those Amazon Prime trucks going up and down the street. So it keeps circling around the neighborhood, and it's causing this sort of traffic jam. So to compensate, the body sends out more trucks because it's saying these haven't arrived. We're going to send out more trucks, which only makes the traffic worse and which makes no packages being delivered. My analogies are off the charts today. So high insulin levels are a problem because they tell the ovaries to produce more androgens, which worsens the symptoms of PCOS. Additionally, excess insulin makes it difficult to lose weight, particularly around the abdomen, which can further perpetuate insulin resistance. So it's this sort of vicious cycle. And a lot of women that I would chat to that have polycystic ovarian syndrome and have huge difficulty losing weight. And they often have had that difficulty since they're of menstruating age. So typically early adolescence is when they'd have started having difficulty with weight. And for those interested, I have a talk specifically on the link between polycystic ovarian syndrome and weight gain in our archive. So I go into a lot more detail with that. But something to take away is insulin is also a fat storing hormone. So if you have lots of insulin in your body's receiving this message constantly to store as much body fat as possible. Body fat and fat around the organs. Wherever that high level of insulin is coming into the body, that signal has been sent. And it's also making it incredibly difficult to lose that weight. So for those that have struggled with polycystic ovarian syndrome and weight, the two are definitely interconnected. And at the root of that, again, is the insulin. So as the insulin starts to come down in the bloodstream, in the body, you're no longer receiving these signals to constantly hold on to weight. And it's one of those secondary symptoms that I was speaking to you about a second ago that, it's fine looking at 3 diagnostic criteria on a piece of paper. Really, that is not showing the full picture of the impact of the felt experience of people that have this condition and their sense of self, their self-confidence, their self-image, and how this condition has impacted how they move through the world, thinking that they are just not able to lose weight, or they've tried everything and it seems to be working for other people but not working for them, and all of the kind of guilt and shame and blame that goes along with that. I would really like to speak to that and say, it is not your fault. You are operating with a condition that is reacting to the foods that you are eating. So all of the symptoms associated with that are directly correlated to the food that you're eating. If you have polycystic ovarian syndrome and are insulin resistant, I'd invite you to start to think of it as a food intolerance. And in the same way as somebody who eats dairy with a dairy intolerance, it's not that there's anything wrong with dairy per se, it means that when they eat it, that breakdown in their system starts to break their system down. And in a similar fashion, when an individual has polycystic ovarian syndrome, when they eat foods that convert to glucose, so anything from the carbohydrate food group will convert down into glucose. There is an intolerance in the system to these foods. Your body cannot break them down properly, and it is giving you that host of symptoms. So there is nothing that you have failed on, but unless you've adopted a way of eating that suits your body type and the intolerances that you have, you will continuously struggle with managing the symptoms of this condition. So a low carb diet, if you think of your three main food groups, and I'll go into the food aspect of things now in a sec, but for those that aren't particularly sure what I mean by carbohydrates, is you have three main components to food groups. You have fats, so things like avocados, eggs, cheeses, butter. You have proteins, which come an awful lot from animal sources, but not always. Things like meat, fish, again, eggs, cheeses will fall into this category as well. Chicken, nuts, some of the pulses and beans would fall under protein as well. And then you've got carbohydrates. And carbohydrates, as a rule of thumb, but not always, but as a rule of thumb, a guesstimate, a lot of them tend to be beige. You know, you've got things like grains, doesn't matter if they're whole grain or non-whole grain. Breads, potatoes, pastas, porridge, bananas, they're the main fellas to avoid. They basically will break down in your system quite rapidly and turn to glucose. So any grain food, a lot of the more tropical fruit, the obvious ones like chocolate cakes, sweets, those kind of ones, but it's going to be grains, which a lot of people have been told they should have more of in their diet because they're quote unquote health foods. Now, this may be correct for an individual out there, but for those with insulin resistance, it doesn't follow the same rules, unfortunately. So for those that may be starting their days with particular brand cereals, porridges, thinking that they're, you know, the thought process and the intention behind it is, I want to make good decisions for my health. If you have a condition that falls under insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, cholesterol difficulties, blood pressure difficulties, sleep apnea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. If you have any of these conditions, it would be in your general health interest to lower your carbohydrate count because they will all break down to sugar in the bloodstream and they're all going to drive up that insulin and make the conditions worse. So not all foods, as I said, are created equal when it comes to managing polycystic ovarian syndrome. So let's take a look at the specific food groups and their impact. Now, I've given the game away a little bit, but I'll go into it a little bit more. Also, if you guys have any questions or comments, there's a little comment box and I can address them as they come in. So, refined carbohydrates, main foods to avoid. White bread, pasta, brown bread as well, actually. Breads of all types, pasta, pastries, rice, potatoes, bananas more specifically, but tropical fruit as well. These carbs are quickly broken down into glucose, flooding the bloodstream and causing insulin to surge. Sugary foods and drinks, so cans of Coke, Lucozade. Lucozade is terrible because it has glucose, which is why it's sold as this sort of sports drink, because for individuals without insulin resistance, they could utilize that glucose as energy and maybe, you know, run another little bit, but actually the science around Lucozade is shoddy at best. Desserts, simple sugars, table sugars, honeys as well, unfortunately. Even though it's a natural food, it breaks down to sugar very, very rapidly. The body has to work overtime to process these, making it really, really hard to control insulin levels. And starchy vegetables, potatoes, corn, sweet potatoes, it's in the name. So even though they do have more vitamins and minerals, they also are incredibly sweet. They're higher in the glycemic index, meaning they convert into glucose faster, causing a rise in your insulin. Now, if you're going, jeepers, Chloe, what am I going to eat? What's happening here? There's lots and lots of different options. Full disclosure, I've been eating this way for over 8 years myself, and I was an absolute hound for the carbohydrates when I was younger, which made my polycystic ovarian syndrome go absolutely haywire. So what can you eat? What foods should you prioritize? Any non-starchy vegetable. So anything else but things like potatoes and sweet potatoes is perfect from a vegetable perspective. The ones that grow above ground are going to be absolutely perfect. There's no need to worry about those whatsoever. They're incredibly low in carbohydrates. You're going to get loads of vitamins and minerals and fibers and all of that from these. So things like leafy greens, broccolis, bell peppers, spinach, asparagus, squashes, aubergines, all of these types of foods. You can make wonderful stir fries. You can make wonderful soups. They're all going to be absolutely fine. And if you're worried about where are you going to get your fiber from, because most of us have been pummeled by the advertising of certain foods to say you need to have this cereal because it has high fiber in it. Now you're going to get just as much, if not more, fiber in the likes of leafy green vegetables. They're absolutely brilliant. They will help to keep your blood sugar and insulin stable. So they're all going to contribute to positive weight loss and a reduction in the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So healthy fats. So fats actually are, from the three food groups, fats have the lowest amount of reaction from blood sugars and from insulin levels. So foods like avocados, olives, nuts, olive oils, by that extension, they have minimal impact on blood sugars and they're excellent for managing insulin levels. So healthy fats also will be the stand-in for your energy source. So usually in a high carbohydrate environment, the body is going to try to use the glucose for energy. Now, that's not really going to work long term if you have any condition that's also reacting to the glucose being there. So to have a backup engine of energy, healthy fats are going to provide that sustained energy without causing the body to produce that excess insulin. Now, a point on fats. Remember, I mentioned insulin being high, excuse me, tells the body to store fat. When the insulin goes back down, do not worry one bit about whole food fats. What I mean by whole food fats are unprocessed fats, not the fats that you would get on the likes of chips, not the fats that you would get in really refined seed oils, margarines, these kind of man-made, very processed foods. I'm talking about fats that are the closest to their natural state. Things like eggs, things like good quality cheeses, things like good quality fatty cuts of meat. They are not going to contribute to your weight gain, which I know is a little bit of a jujitsu for the mind for some people, because we've all kind of grown thinking that fats make you fat. But actually, what we see over and over in this particular way of eating is a reduction in body weight and a reduction in fat around the organs as well. So it's absolutely brilliant to keep you full, to keep you energized, and to get that lever on the insulin nice and low. Proteins then, eggs, chicken, fish, protein-rich foods that keep you full and satisfied without spiking insulin. So I mentioned the fats have almost no effect. If you're to look at it like one of those lie detector tests, I don't know what the right name for them is, it would just give a line. This is fats. It's just a line. For proteins, you might have an odd bloop, bloop, bloop. It's called a pulsatile effect. So it's a very, very small blip. And proteins are excellent because basically your body is made of fats and proteins. So you know the whole thing, you are what you eat. With proteins, they will break down in your system to create muscle fibers, joint fibers, bone density, all of the connective tissue in your body. It is absolutely brilliant to have as much protein as you can. And fats, your brain is made of fats, your eyeballs are made of fats. There's no part of your body made of carbohydrates. So the other thing that you can bring in is low glycemic fruit. Berries like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries are packed with antioxidants and nutrients, but have a much, much lower impact on blood sugars compared to fruits like bananas, apples, grapes, pears, you know, the ones that everybody knows and loves. So things like berries, plums, coconut, they're all going to be fine, really, to have. And a really nice alternative to breakfast for a lot of people is Greek yogurt with some berries, with some nuts, a little bit of dark chocolate. That's all going to be fine to have. Otherwise, what people have for breakfast would be things like eggs, would be things like bacon and eggs, or any source of meat. So the science behind the low carb diet I'll just change my little sticker there. There we go. I've gone into quite a bit. So the kind of main takeaways to have a think of is most of the symptoms, all of the symptoms associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome are going to be made worse by high insulin. In your food types, only the carbohydrate food group is going to break down to glucose and raise your insulin level. So it stands to reason to look after the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome and to reverse some of these. Having a diet as low as possible in carbohydrates is going to be key, including foods that are above ground vegetables, good quality whole food fats, proteins, and the likes of berries and low sugar fruits are going to be absolutely excellent. Avoiding, I call them the big five. So bananas are the main offenders where fruit is concerned, which is a pity because they're delicious, but we might love them, but they don't love us back. So bananas, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, breads, rice, pasta. If you even avoided these 5 foods or reduced your portion size considerably, you will find a massive, massive positive impact in your overall health, in your blood sugar levels, your symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome, and as a knock-on effect, things that are affected by it, things like weight, things like facial hair, things like scanty menstrual cycles or anything like that. So overall, the major takeaway here is low carbohydrate. Try to stick under 100. That's a nice round number. If you're somebody that likes to track, there's brilliant apps out there. Things like MyFitnessPal and Yuka, Y-U-C-A, are brilliant tracking apps. They can kind of give you a good ballpark of where these types of foods are. If you're looking at the back of packets, look at the first line that says total carbohydrates and have a look at what that's like per portion. As an overall rule, if you're someone that doesn't like counting numbers, personally, I hate it. Above ground vegetables, all fine. Meats, eggs, fish of all sorts, all fine. I make the joke of if it flew, walked, swam, or crawled the earth, it's fine to eat. And it's not going to have a negative impact on cholesterol because remember, cholesterol is also implicated in insulin resistance. So looking after that insulin resistance is going to, by proxy, look after things like cholesterol, blood pressure, liver health, pancreatic health, and the whole shebang. So above ground vegetables, proteins, fats, berries, all good. Dairy products, all good. And things to avoid: breads, potatoes, rice, pastas, bananas. Right. I think that has given you the point. I don't want to labor it too much in case I'd be melting your heads, but those are the basic rules to follow for the reversal of polycystic ovarian syndrome. I hope you guys found that helpful. And if you have any questions, please do pop them into the old comment box or comments in general. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your day, and Andrew will be back with you guys next week. I never put my glasses on and I really need to. Right. Have a lovely day. Bye now.